Hi, I'm Pamela Howland, and I am so happy to be back here with you at St. John's on the Lake. Today, I will be presenting my new program called Dreaming of Spring, the life and music of Claude Debussy. And I'm hoping that this music conjures up images and sights and sounds of spring for you so that you can truly believe that spring is going to return to Milwaukee. Today, I will be performing 6 of Debussy's piano masterworks, which highlight the influences and elements of his compositional style. But before I do that, I'd like to share with you a very short film that I made, which is sort of everything you've always wanted to know about Debussy's life and music in just 8 minutes. It's what I call a drive-by documentary. And I'm hoping that it will put you in the mood for this music and give you some context. So let's go ahead and watch that first. On August 22, 1862, Claude Debussy is born to a poor, struggling French family. As a boy, he is a loner and a dreamer who thinks he might like to be a painter someday. According to his sister, rather than play with other children, he would spend entire days sitting in a chair dreaming, no one knew what about. Debussy will compose all types of music throughout his life, for orchestra, chamber ensemble, voice, and even an opera. But his piano music will hold a special place in people's hearts. His musical talent is obvious from his earliest piano lessons. Before long, even his father, who had wanted Debussy to be a sailor, is now excited about his son's future in music. Debussy studies with Madame Motet de Fleurville, a Parisian piano teacher who claims to have studied with the great Chopin. She develops Debussy's musical genius and prepares him for an audition at the famed Paris Conservatory, where he is accepted at the young age of 10. As a student, Debussy would much rather experiment at the piano with strange new chords, harmonies, musical colors, and textures than follow the traditional rules of composition. His apparent delight in breaking the rules annoys and enrages many of his professors, and he wins no prizes in piano during his time at the conservatory. But at the end of his studies, he does win the Prix de Rome, a coveted fellowship for young composers, only to walk away from this fellowship halfway through. He returns to Paris, where he pursues cafe nightlife, liaisons with beautiful women, and new entertainments from America, ragtime music and the circus. The first major turning point in Debussy's career comes when Paris hosts its version of a World's Fair, the 1889 Exposition Universelle. This exciting event is set against the backdrop of Gustave Eiffel's controversial new tower. Erected in celebration of the French Revolution, it receives praise from some, but scorn from others who fear it will ruin the Parisian landscape. The purpose of the exposition is to expose Parisians to the possibilities of new technologies like gas light and heat, and Edison's new phonograph. But it is another attraction that has the fairgoers spellbound. In the entertainment pavilions, exotic musicians and dancers from over 50 countries entice the crowds with samplings of their traditional culture. Debussy is completely thunderstruck when he encounters the musicians and dancers from Java with their orchestra of gongs, bells, chimes, and drums, called the gamelan. After repeated trips to their pavilion, hypnotic Indonesian sounds fill his head, and he comes away with 2 musical scales, which help him to create new, magical sound worlds. The pentatonic scale, with 5 notes and no half steps, found most easily by playing the 5 black keys of the piano. And the whole tone scale, a simple series of whole steps that allow Debussy to create dreamlike, ethereal sounds never heard before in European music. Debussy is also captivated by the other art forms of his time. His imagination is ignited by the Impressionist painters, Monet, Manet, Degas, and Renoir, and he is influenced by their outdoor painting technique of capturing quick impressions of a scene. He also draws inspiration from symbolist and pre-Raphaelite painters. The work of symbolist poets Verlaine, Baudelaire, and Mallarmé employs subtle suggestion and illusion to evoke moods and feelings, exploring themes of delirium, dreams, unconscious forces, narcotics, medieval settings, water, and sexuality, which seep deeply into Debussy's new music. At 30, Debussy is a famous composer well known for his beautiful music and his refined fascinations with Japanese art, cats, and beautiful women with green eyes. But his abrasive personality and harsh behavior do not endear him to all Parisians. His continual liaisons with women eventually lead to scandals in the press when his longtime lover, artist's model Gaby Dupont, tries to kill herself after Debussy leaves her for Lily Texier. Although he marries Lily, he quickly dumps her too, and in her despair, she too attempts suicide by shooting herself in the chest. People take sides, and Debussy loses many longtime friends. Soon, another major turning point changes Debussy's world forever. In 1905, he marries Emma Bardac, and their daughter, Claude Emma, is born. Debussy the loner is delighted by his child as he rarely is by other people. Their shared world of make-believe and musical games inspires him personally and professionally. In the increasingly depressed 12 remaining years of his life, Debussy's little girl is his ray of sunshine. He calls her Chouchou, a French nickname meaning my little cabbage. In the tumultuous first years of the new century and the bleak approach of World War I, Debussy grows ill and struggles to pay his mounting bills. Never a very fast or prolific composer, he must leave home periodically to take conducting jobs across Europe, adding to his unhappiness. The forces of advancing illness and wartime devastation bring Debussy face to face with his own mortality. All Debussy's life, others have labeled him and his work, but in the end, he merely wants to be known as Claude Debussy, musicien français. Debussy dies on March 25, 1918, and the 12-year-old Chouchou writes to her half-brother, "At the cemetery, all I could think was, I mustn't cry because of Maman. I didn't shed a single tear, and now it is night forever. Papa is dead. I don't know how I stay alive, and I can't believe the awful truth." The legacy of Claude Debussy is that of a father who loved his little girl and a brilliant composer whose daring experiments revolutionized the music world and opened the door to the 20th century.
The next piece that I'll play for you is the prelude from Sweetburger Mask. Sweetburger Mask is a group of 4 pieces, 3 of which were written in 1890, like this prelude, but the 4th wasn't completed till just before publication in 1905. And this 4th piece is the very famous Clair de Lune, which I'll be playing for you later. This prelude is a great way to hear early Debussy, which was still so heavily under the influence of the 19th century Romantic, both French and German composers that he studied at the conservatory. The piece is bold, it's triumphant, and it's joyful, but it lacks a lot of the subtlety that we associate with his later music. It begins like this. Now, there are passages that you'll hear that remind us of later, the subtleties and kind of the swirling sounds, the cascading music, like this. But this is great for us to hear our 28-year-old composer just after he has gone to the Exposition Universelle, that wonderful World's Fair in 1889 that completely changed his life and saw the rise of the Eiffel Tower. Here's the prelude to Sweetburger Mask. The next piece that I'll play is another piece that is an early work from 1890, but it is slightly farther down the experimental impressionist continuum that Debussy was on. Now, the disclaimer here is that I am using the term impressionist as it applies to Debussy, even though he did not like for people to do that. But because the term is so popularized and we know he did come under the influence of the impressionist painters, we'll stick with it. This piece is a beautiful reverie, just like the title. Of course, in English, reverie, we know what it means, but in French, it comes from the French verb rêver, to dream, or reverie, the state of dreaming. And for Debussy, being able to express in music this dreaming state becomes more and more important. The piece starts like this. And what's so beautiful about it and makes it so dreamy is actually not the melody, which is kind of atypical. The melody is perfectly lovely, but it's really the left hand and the rhythm, the accompaniment, that gives this piece our dreamy, hazy feeling, like this. And that's because even though this piece is in 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, Debussy is not reiterating the second beat. So he's kind of suspending time for us. If I repeat the second beat, it would sound like this. Not very relaxing or dreamy. But the other thing that Debussy does is something he will continue to do, and that is experiment with new pedaling. The right pedal, or what we call the damper pedal, allows the dampers to rise off of the strings and mix all kinds of sounds and overtones. So he's starting to blur sounds. By leaving the pedal on longer. So I hope that you find your own reverie in this piece. And now we jump 20 years ahead to the year 1910 with the very famous piece called The Girl with the Flaxen Hair, or La Fille aux Cheveux de Lin. Now, in this mature work of Debussy's, we can easily and quickly hear the poetry, painting, and music influences on him. I'm sure that you know this piece, and it begins like this. And right away with the title, it is directly derived from a Verlaine poem with the same title. When we get to the musical influences, we need to go back to that 1889 exposition where he learned these amazing, to him, new scales, the pentatonic scale and the whole tone scale. Now, we will deal with the whole tone scale later, but this piece is essentially built all out of the pentatonic scale. And how to find that 5-note scale, penta or 5, is just go to the black keys. Now you can build a pentatonic scale on any note, but it's easiest to find it on the black keys so that it's so harmonious because of the way, the pattern of it. If you don't play the piano and you want to impress someone, if you put your foot down on the damper pedal and you play all of these notes, it sounds great. Now contrast that with our major scale, which, although the pentatonic is ancient and found in many, many cultures and folk music forever, our major scale is only about 400 years old. And just quickly to review, the major scale is made out of half steps and whole steps. So here we have a half step on the piano is 1 note to the very next note, and 2 halves make a whole. So we have do, re is a whole, re to mi is a whole, mi to fa is only a half, and then whole, ti to do. So if we play all of those notes together, it doesn't sound harmonious like the pentatonic. But I love that we can find this pentatonic scale in African American music, Asian music, Celtic music. So let's try to find with these 5 notes Amazing Grace. Or the spiritual, Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. Or how about this one? Our Debussy melody. So these were the large musical influences on this piece, and the piece is deceptively simple. But finally, we also have the Impressionist painter's philosophy. You will remember that they wanted to get painting out of the old academy, the old dark studio where they used dark colors, heavy paint, heavy brush strokes, and we're always trying to render a subject exactly, realistically so. So they took their painting outdoors, plein air painting, and they wanted to capture an impression quickly with lighter colors and maybe the influence of sunlight and quick brush strokes. But the point was not so much to capture the object, in this case, a girl with the flaxen hair, as the feeling of it. So Debussy very much is not necessarily in musical tones trying to give us a picture of a girl with lovely hair, but how does that girl feel, perhaps? What's the impression of it? What is our impression, perhaps, when we're watching her? So this is Debussy's true mature work, and I hope you enjoy The Girl with the Flaxen Hair. And now we come to one of my very favorite Debussy pieces called Reflections in the Water, or Reflets dans l'eau. And even though this piece is from 1905, it's a veritable compendium of Impressionist expressions and techniques of Debussy's. It starts like this. And for me, that sets up this glassy surface of water where we might find reflections. So it's almost as though he's improvising with these beautiful chords. And then we have our pentatonic melody, which emerges. And then we find a huge use in this piece of the whole tone scale, which I said we'd talk about. And it's easy to make a whole tone scale. A whole tone is the same synonym for a whole step. All you do is you combine two half steps. So you have a whole, and you can just add them up. And this type of use of whole tone scale in music, in Western classical music, just does not happen before Debussy's time. He's a real pioneer here. But what happens is that later in early movies and TV and even current movies, it becomes a cliche or a musical symbol for dreaming. And here's an example from the work. Now we know Debussy also experimented from early youth with chords, all kinds of chords. And remember, he got in trouble for it. He broke all kinds of rules. And of course, musically, we're glad he did that because of his creations. But he took simple chords like this triad with first, third, fifth, and seventh, very common sounding, but added ninths, 11ths, 13ths. So we almost have something that sounds like jazz. Or and just these chords that he combines. If I go like this, that sounds like modern jazz. Now remember that this is 1905 and jazz hasn't even been invented yet. Ragtime is the only thing coming to Europe from America. So this is quite amazing, and truly Debussy is the composer who opened up the door to jazz. And then we find an astonishing segment in the climax of the piece. First of all, the climax in Reflections in the Water is kind of in the middle of the piece, not at the end. All previous romantic composers would, rush to the finale, the big ending, but not here. But here's this astonishing passage. And the melody here is. Now I'm going to just alter that rhythm slightly, and I want you to see if it conjures up a piece that hasn't been written yet in 1905. Now, if you say Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin, I would agree with you. That piece wasn't written until 1926. Now, I'm not saying at all that Gershwin stole that from Debussy, but one of the fascinating things about music history is that even though Gershwin was just 30 years younger than Debussy, when Gershwin was studying his classical piano, he learned the 3 Bs, of course, Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, and Chopin. He was also learning Debussy's music, and Debussy was still alive. So certainly he was quite influenced by Debussy. And then finally we get to the ending of this piece, which is very dreamlike and very impressionist, not romantic in the barnstormer ending style. It's a little bit like this. And these drop notes, to me, conjure up a pool of water. We see that pebble drop in and rings spreading out and reflections. And now we come to something completely different. In the year 1908, Debussy wrote a series of pieces for his daughter who he loved so much called Chouchou, and the series was called the Children's Corner Suite. And there were 6 pieces. This last piece, they were all about scenes from childhood. The last piece is called Gollywog's Cakewalk. And this is Debussy's attempt to try his hand at writing a ragtime piece, which was coming over from America at that time to the Paris cafes. And he's not only trying to write ragtime, but it's sort of an homage to the great Scott Joplin, who invented ragtime. You'll remember Joplin's biggest hit in 1899, not that you were there, but in 1899 he came out with Maple Leaf Rag, and it sounds like this. Now, what makes ragtime, 2 things, and we'll talk about those. But this is the dance hall music of Joplin's. The dance that was danced to this music is called the two-step. And this was in the late 1890s, early 1900s, a partner dance, which was considered scandalous at the time. This was the kids' new music, but the partners would hold on to each other, which was forbidden at that time. And they'd stand like this, and it was taught quick, quick, slow, quick, quick, slow, or short, short, long, short, short, long, and they would move around the dance floor to this music. And it's the rhythm that's the rag part of this that got everybody excited. So this is in 2, it's a 2-step, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, but we have a syncopated rhythm. The accents are on the offbeats, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. So this is the principal technique of ragtime, and Debussy uses that. After a brief introduction, you'll hear it. So in Debussy's piece, it's an ABA form. That theme makes up the A section at the beginning and concludes the piece with the A section. But in the middle, Debussy is experimenting sort of with an impressionistic view of kind of Paris cafe life, not American cafe life. And it's a little bit sophisticated, but it's also a little bit tongue-in-cheek. So the last thing that makes ragtime is the sense of joy or joie de vivre that we hear. So I hope you enjoy it. And now we finally come to the very famous Clair de Lune, which is the piece that has been enchanting audiences for over 100 years. The title itself comes from a Verlaine poem by the same name. And this is the piece that people really remember when they think of Debussy's music. Now, you'll remember that it is actually part of the Sweetburger Mask. The first three pieces, and that very first piece I played you, the prelude, is from 1890, but Clair de Lune was not completed until 1905. And I know you know it, but it begins like this. So certainly that conjures up moonlight. But the most famous melody from this piece doesn't even make an appearance until at least 2 minutes into the piece. And that goes like this. And we can hear these rippling arpeggios, kind of like images of rippling fields or rippling water. And so that's part of the appeal. But one of the most fascinating parts of this piece for me is that, again, we're going to go back to that influence from that 1889 World's Fair, where Debussy heard the Javanese orchestra called gamelan. The gamelan consists of gongs that are low and bells and chimes, which are higher. So in this segment, which sets up the most famous theme, what we'll hear is Debussy, who was revolutionary about using different segments of the piano to create different textures, timbres, sounds, and colors. So if you can pull your ear down here low, this is the gong, and the chimes or bells. Perhaps they're even wind chimes, but try to let your ear go down here as well as up here. So it's beautiful, and then we get to. And this piece is the epitome of the Impressionist idea of trying to capture a fleeting impression, the emotions of something. Again, Debussy does paint moonlight beautifully at the piano, but he's, I think, more after how does it make us feel to be in the moonlight? Are we there with someone else? Are we alone? Are we happy? So before I play this piece, I would just like to thank you so much for being here with me today. And I hope that this helps you to continue dreaming of spring. This is Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy.